Let me ask you a question and no Googling, okay? Which would you say is the most innovative country in the world? I'm sure for many of you, countries such as the United States, South Korea, or Germany came immediately to mind. And yes, indeed, these countries have large scientific and innovative sectors. But what if I told you that there's another country that invests even more than all of them in research and development and achieves even better results? Well, pay attention to this. Also known as the Silicon Valley of the East, Israel is the answer to the question that I just asked you. Israel is currently the country with the highest R&D investment per capita in the world. And take note, because here we are not just talking about public investment, we are talking about the fact that this country has managed to create an environment where companies go mad for investing their money in developing the most advanced technologies on the planet. For example, did you know that even though Israel is located in the middle of the desert, it has a huge agricultural sector? Yeah, that's right. If you go to a European supermarket tomorrow, you will surely find oranges, lemons, or even strawberries of Israeli origin. Again, fruits and vegetables that are produced in the desert. It's crazy, I know. But do you want to know how that is possible? Well, it is precisely thanks to the investment and innovation that I have just mentioned. It's a commitment that, for example, has allowed the country to develop technologies capable of genetically altering plants so that they can be irrigated with semi-saline water from the sea or even from saltwater aquifers. You know the saying, brains often beat brawn. The point is that this innovative capacity has allowed Israel to become one of the richest countries in the world and to surpass even the great European powers. Take a look at this. In recent years, Israel has achieved a GDP per capita slightly higher than that of European giants such as Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. Something especially remarkable if we take into account that in their part of the world, the usual rule of order is poverty, or at least medium to low incomes. Remember that Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt are its neighboring countries here. Not exactly economic superpowers, no offense to any of them. So, Visualeconomik fans, in this video, we will talk about what exactly Israel has done to become a global power. We will explain their formula for having the highest R&D investment rate in the world and show you what other countries would have to do to imitate their model and to get rich along the way. But before we continue, I am sure you have started the year with some resolution or other, maybe to exercise more or spend less money on a certain brand of coffee or get serious about learning a language. Well, regarding that last one, no more excuses. With Speakly, you can learn languages like Spanish, French, German, Italian, and of course, English. We know that some of you are not native English speakers, and one of your goals is to improve your English. Speakly offers you everything you need to reinforce or learn a new language. You will learn new vocabulary, practice with oral, written, and listening exercises, and that's not all. They even have a section with recommended songs for you so that you can practice learning while enjoying great music. And keep in mind that Speakly's methodology is proven. It has been proven to show results 5 times faster than the usual apps. By practicing only 30 minutes a day, you could have a solid conversational level in about 3 to 4 months. Don't wait any longer. Stop making excuses and start learning languages in 2023 with Speakly. Download the app, which is available for both Android and iOS, and try it totally free for 7 days. If you want to go for the annual subscription, take advantage of the 60% discount for the Visualeconomik community. We'll leave you the link in the description below. And now, let's get cracking. I am sure at the beginning of this video, many of you would have thought that if Israel is rich, then it is precisely because the great protege and ally of the United States in the Middle East. Many of you will think that Israel's economic success is due to the enormous aid and investments made by Western powers in this Hebrew country. However, nothing could be further from the truth. What would you say if I told you that Israel was, for a good part of its country, a very close to socialist country? Yes, indeed. For much of the 20th century, Israel was a country strongly influenced by socialism and very interventionist government in virtually all areas of the economy, something that left its economic performance mediocre. In fact, while a moment ago we told you that today Israel is as rich or even richer than countries like Germany or France, the truth is that until the 1990s, the opposite was true. Let's take a look. At that time, the major European countries almost doubled Israel's income. Until the 1990s, Israel's economic management was ridiculous. Israel was a country more similar to Latin America than to the United States. And don't get me wrong, when I talk about Latin America, I'm referring to the populist and interventionist movements that abound in that region. Take a look at this graph, for example. As you can see, between 1974 and 1986, Israel had an inflation rate that was consistently above 30%, more than 3 times the inflation rates being experienced in developed countries after the Ukrainian war. But that's not all. It turns out that in 1984, Israeli inflation soared to almost, wait for it, 400%. To give you an idea, this meant that hyperinflation even higher than the one experienced by Venezuela in 2015. You must be surprised, right? So, why was there so much inflation in Israel during those years? Well, the answer is a little bit the same as always. The Israeli government was one of those governments that systematically spent far more money than it had. For example, there were years where government spending exceeded 76% of GDP. And naturally, in order to finance all this enormous spending, the government had no choice but to hit the money printing machine in the purest Venezuelan style. And as if that were not enough, the Israeli economy also suffered from many other ills that also abound in Latin America. We are talking about a huge hodgepodge of inefficient public enterprises, harsh price controls, and a financial system crumbling under the country's de facto dollarization. You could say that Israel was a fully fledged banana economy. Be that as it may, by the 1990s, the country had made a 180-degree turnaround. From then on, a series of important political changes took place that transformed Israel from an economy in its infancy to the technological superpower that it is today. Do you want to know what changes we're talking about? Do you want to know what was the key to Israel's success? Of course you do. So let's find out.
Calling for calm.
Before I give on, just give me a second. Do you find this video interesting? Do you want to discover more information about topics like this? Well, if you do, don't forget to subscribe to all of us here at Visualeconomik and hit the little bell button down there. It's 100% free, so without having to pay a single red cent, you can enjoy a range of videos as interesting as this one. So the question should be, why not subscribe? Just hit the button and that's it. With that said though, take a look at this photo. The man you see on the screen is Shimon Peres. For those who don't know, Shimon Peres was Israeli Prime Minister who took the first step to the major reforms that we are going to talk about in this video. You see, this Prime Minister first came to power in 1984, the year in which inflation reached nearly 400% and the country was experiencing one of the greatest periods of economic instability in its history. So not surprisingly, Shimon Peres's first objective was precisely to fight inflation with an iron fist. The question is, how do you stop 400% inflation in a single stroke? What was Peres's master plan? Basically, his plan consisted of 2 very clear actions. 2 actions, by the way, that countries like Venezuela or Argentina could take note of. But that's a topic for another day. Let's not get sidetracked. The first of these actions was to establish tight controls over government finances. Among other things, loss-making public enterprises were privatized, the salaries of state employees were frozen, and the issuances of new currency was cut off. Conclusion? Well, as you can see on the screen, the public deficit went from average figures greater than 10% to surpluses of over 2% after Shimon Peres's reforms. In other words, the government stopped spending money it did not have and stopped hitting the money printing machine quite so hard, which inevitably curbed inflation. But that was not enough. As is the case today in some Latin American countries, Israel's economy in the 1980s was heavily dollarized. To give you an idea, only 3% of bank deposits in 1984 were denominated in shekels, the local currency. Let's just say that after several periods of galloping inflation, Israelis had simply lost confidence in their own currency. And so of course, if your goal is to keep inflation at bay, what you have to do is make your local currency rock solid. That, or as we have told you in other videos, formally dollarize your economy. The thing is, that's where Shimon Peres's second major action comes in: central bank independence. You see, until the arrival of Peres, the Central Bank of Israel had always been under the control of the government of the day. That's why the previous rulers had such an easy time spending money like crazy and fearlessly hitting the money printing presses like there was no tomorrow. It's true that Peres stopped following this bad example of the previous governments and controlled the public finances. But the truth is that nothing was in place to prevent a future wasteful ruler coming to power and going back to spending, and with that, inflation would skyrocket again. Think about it. Would you go back to using shekels, knowing that if a future irresponsible politician comes along, inflation could skyrocket again? Well, probably not, right? So, Shimon Peres did something to make sure that no politician in the future could ever trigger inflation again. What he did was to give independence to the central bank. In other words, the central bank stopped obeying the orders of the government of the day and began to act independently, with the sole objective of keeping inflation at bay. thanks to this change, as you can see on the screen, little by little, the use of the local currency increased. The percentage of bank deposits denominated in shekels went from 3% in 1984 to 38% in 2002. In short, the dollar eventually disappeared from the Israeli economy to make way for a local currency that was, in fact, stronger than ever before. All these changes allowed the Hebrew country to enter a new era of prosperity and economic stability. Inflation was reduced over the next decade to between 0 and 2%. And as you can see on the screen, the Israeli economy grew at breakneck speed during the following years, with average GDP growth close to 5%. In short, prosperity, calm, and stability came to Israel. However, that was actually not enough. Israel not only wanted to be a country with stability and calm, but also wanted to become one of the most advanced economies in the world. And to do that, they realized one thing. They realized that what they had to do was to bring the best scientists, the best engineers, and the best companies in the West. And not only that, they had to get them to work on potentially huge projects. But obviously, this challenge faced one major problem. Israel is a country practically isolated in the desert with nothing particularly important around, and on top of it all, it was rife with conflict on all sides and internally. Bringing the best companies and scientists under those conditions, well, it was not going to be an easy job. In this case, it would not be enough to lower taxes or ease regulations as countries like Ireland did at the time. No, here, something more was needed. And it was just at that moment that the YOSMA program was born.
YOSMA, the technological miracle.
You see, back in 1991, the government of Israel realized something else. In the private sector, there were several small companies and promising projects that often ended up dying because they lacked capital. In other words, there were people in Israel with good ideas, with talent and ingenuity, but without money or confidence to move these projects forward. But how could this problem be solved? The government came up with an idea. It occurred to them that one way to keep these projects going might be to invest public money in them. If they could boost entrepreneurship and innovation that way, it could be money well invested. However, this idea also had a big problem. Which projects should the public resources be invested in? Which ones should be let go? Who would be in charge of deciding where the money would go? These may seem like silly questions, but what usually happens in these cases is that the money distributed by politicians usually ends up in projects with no future, or, even worse, in the pockets of the cronies they have on duty. We all know this story, a lot of hot air and a waste of resources. That is why the Israeli government came up with another idea to solve this niggling problem. Look at this. Normally, in developed countries, there are organizations called venture capital funds. These organizations basically invest in small companies and in disruptive projects or projects based on innovative ideas. Basically, the job of venture capital funds is to select young companies with a promising future, inject a lot of money into them so that they can grow, and once they have grown, reap the benefits. You understand that Israel's plan was actually very similar to what venture capital funds do. The objective was the same, to choose small companies with potential, many of them technology companies, and give them money so that they could get off the ground. So, since the private equity funds were much more experienced in doing that kind of work than Israel's politicians or officials, what the government did was to propose a kind of alliance with them, a massive one. The Israeli government created 10 venture capital funds. Each fund that was able to raise $12 million from private investors would receive $8 million in public investment. In return, the government would keep 40% of the property, but if the investment were successful, then the private investors, those venture capital funds we have already mentioned, could buy out the public stake by simply returning the money to government that they had put in, plus a small interest rate. In this way, a total of $200 million that at that time was mobilized. Naturally, the venture capital groups were free to select a project in which they would invest their own money. But pay attention, because in addition, this strategy had two major advantages that should not be overlooked. The first is that 60% of the investment came from private venture capital funds themselves. That is, suddenly a flood of money from other countries was pouring into Israel to develop the most cutting-edge local projects. In a way, this strategy allowed the Israeli government to invest in its development, but with foreign money rather than its own, without the need for huge amounts of public spending. But the second advantage is that, if you think about it, by investing in small companies, many of them ended up growing in such a way that the government could recover its own investment. In fact, do you want to know the funniest thing of all? The YOSMA program ended up having a zero cost for public finances. Later, with the success of the first round of investment, the YOSMA program has continued to this day, growing a multitude of technology companies and startups at virtually no cost to the government, attracting foreign capital and creating a huge technology network in the country. To give a few figures on the success of YOSMA, from the beginning of the program until today, Israel has increased the number of startups in the country by a factor of 20. There are currently more than 6,000 in operation. On the other hand, according to the OECD, Israel is one of the countries with the highest number of patent registrations in the world, despite having a population of just over 9 million inhabitants. And as if that were not enough, as you can see in this graph, the strongest sector in the country is science and technology, far ahead of the second and almost twice as powerful as the third. In short, the YOSMA program was a real boost to Israeli entrepreneurship, a boost that today, 30 years after its implementation, has resulted in the highest rate of investment in innovation in the world. Of course, this was accompanied by additional measures such as a major tax cut for technology companies, which went from nearing 23% to just 7.5%. There was also a huge investment in scientific infrastructure such as incubators along with public universities. There was a major recruitment process for skilled immigrants, along with significant bureaucratic streamlining that has made Israel one of the easiest countries in the world to do business in according to the Doing Business ranking. Be that as it may, the point of this video is to show how a boost to private initiative with the financial support of the government, but trusting those who know how to do things without interfering, served to achieve something that many countries, not even those that invest billions each year, have managed to do in decades. That is, to become a technological powerhouse. So it seems that sometimes it is better to spend well and know what you are doing than to spend a lot without clear objectives. In any case, at this point, it's all over to you. Do you think that the Israeli model of success could be applicable in your country? Were you surprised that some simple and cheap measure could develop the economy so much? What conclusions do you draw from this whole incredible story? Leave me your answers in the comments below. And as always, don't forget that here on Visualeconomik, we release new videos every single week. So don't forget to hit the little like button down there so we know if you like the video, and subscribe to all of us here at our channel. All the best, and I'll see you next time.